on how to humble ourselves under God's providential dealings with us. By the law of providence, he intends God's sovereign disposal of all the concerns of men in this world, in a variety, order, and manner which he pleases, according to the rule and infinite reason of his own goodness, wisdom, righteousness, and truth. To evince what it is to humble ourselves under the law of God's providence, some general observations must be given. First, there is, and ever was, somewhat very much, in God's providential administration of the things of this world and concern of the sons of men in it, which the most improved reasons of men cannot understand, and which is contrary to all that is in us as merely men, of judgment, affections, or what else soever we are acted by. Your judgments, says David to God, are far above, out of his sight. Psalm 10, verse 5. That is, of the man he is speaking of. He is not able to see the ground and reason, or the order and beauty of them. In Psalm 36, verse 6, your righteousness is like a great mountain, and your judgments are a great deep. That is, as a sea which none can look into the bottom of, nor know what is done in the caverns of it. So that there is a height in the judgments of God not to be measured, and a depth not to be fathomed. Men cannot look into his ways. So also 77, verse 19, your way is in the sea, and your path in the great waters, and your footsteps are not known. Men must be content to stand at the shore and admire the works of God, but as to the beauty and excellency of them, they cannot search them out. To this purpose is Zophar's discourse in Job 11, 7-12. It is of the excellency and perfection of God and his works of providence that he is speaking. In the consideration of whose unsearchableness, he closes with that of verse 12. Vain man would know the secrets of the counsel of God, the reason of his ways, but in his attempts after it he is as an ass, as a wild ass, as a colt of a wild ass, than which nothing could be spoken with more contempt to abase the pride of a poor creature. The ways of God are, we know, all perfect. He is our rock, and his work is perfect. Nothing can be added to them, nor taken from them. Yea, they are all comely and beautiful in their season. There is not anything comes out from him, but it is from wonderful counsel, and all of his ways will at length be found to praise him. But as Job speaks in chapter 9, verse 11, we do not perceive it. We don't take notice of it. For who has known his mind, or has been his counselor? Romans 11:33 and 34. So not only the heathen were entangled in the consideration of the works of providence, some, upon it turning atheists, most, ascribing all things to blind uncertain chance and contingency, and others, very few, laboring to set a luster upon what they could not understand. But we have the people of God themselves disputing with him about the equality of his ways, bringing arguments against it, and contending against his wisdom in them. You say the way of the Lord is not equal. Ezekiel 18, verse 25. And again, do they do this in chapter 33, verse 20? Yet you say the way of the Lord is not equal. Yea, not only the common people, but the choicest of God's servants, under the Old Testament, were exceedingly exercised with this, that they could not oftentimes see the beauty and excellency, nor understand the reason or order of God's dispensations, which I might prove at large. Any examples of Job, David, Heman, Jeremiah, Habakkuk, and others. Yet there was nothing that God was more put to in dealing with his people of old than to justify the righteousness and perfections of his providential dealings against their unjust, unbelieving complaints and manners. This, then, being the condition of God's providential dispensations in general, that there is much in them not only above us and unsearchable to us, as to the reason and beauty of his ways, but also contrary to all that is in us of reason, judgment, or affections. There is surely need of humbling our souls to the law of his providence, if we intend to walk with him. Neither is there any other way to come to an agreement with him or to quiet our hearts from repining. Secondly, there are 4 things in God's providential disposing of the things and concerns of men in the world that require this humbling of ourselves to him, as being no way able to grapple with him. First, visible confusion. Secondly, unspeakable variety. Thirdly, sudden alterations. And fourthly, deep distresses. Number 1, visible confusion. Like that mentioned in Isaiah 8, verse 22. He that takes a view of the general state of the things in the world will see nothing but trouble, darkness, and anguish. Yea, darkness covers the earth, and gross darkness the people. The oppression of tyrants, wasting of nations, destruction of men and beasts, fury and desolations make up the things of the past and present ages. The greatest and choicest parts of the earth in the meantime inhabited by them that know not God. They hate him, that fill and replenish the world with habitations of cruelty, sporting themselves in mischief, like the Leviathan in the sea. In respect of this, God is said to make darkness a secret place in his pavilion. Psalm 18, verse 11. And to dwell in the thick darkness, 2 Chronicles 6, verse 1, and to wait for the end of this dispensation, to humble themselves to the law of it, is the patience and wisdom of the saints, Habakkuk 2, verse 1. Secondly, unspeakable variety. Not to insist on particulars, the case of the saints throughout the world is the only example I shall mention, and that on a twofold account. First, compared among themselves, in what unspeakable variety are they dealt with? Some under persecution, always. Some always at peace, some in dungeons and prisons, some at liberty in their own houses, the saints of one nation under great oppression for many ages. Of another, in quietness in the same places, some poor, in great distress, put hard to it for daily bread all their lives. Others abounding in all things, some full of various afflictions, going softly and mourning all their days. Others are spared, and scarce touched with a rod at all. And yet, commonly, the advantage of holiness and close walking with God lying on the distressed side. How does God deal also with families in respect of grace? Well, he takes one whole family into covenant, and leaves out another whole family whose heads and springs are no less holy. He comes into his house and takes one, and leaves another, takes a despised outcast, and leaves a darling one. Of them also some are wise, endowed with great gifts and abilities, others weak to contempt and reproach. Who can now, with an eye of reason, look upon them and say they are all the children of one Father, and that he loves them all alike? Should you come into a great house, and see some children in scarlet, having all things needful, others chopping wood and drawing water, you would conclude that they are not all children, but some children, some slaves. But when it shall be told you that they are all one man's children, and that the wood choppers, that live on the bread and water of affliction, and go in tattered rags, are as dear to him as the other, and that he intends to leave them as good an inheritance as any of the rest. If you don't intend to question the wisdom and goodness of the father of the family, you must resolve to submit to his authority with a quiet subjection of mind. So is it in the great family of God. Nothing will quiet our souls but humbling ourselves to the law of his providence. Secondly, comparing them with others as a hard case of old, the pleading of which by Job, David, Jeremiah, and Habakkuk is so known that I shall not need to further insist upon it. I shall not further manifest this from the variety which is in the dispensations of God towards the men of the world, which the wisest of men can reduce to no rule of righteousness as things pass among us. Solomon acquaints us with it in Ecclesiastes 9:11. Thirdly, sudden alterations. As in the case of Job, God takes a man whom he has blessed with choice blessings in the midst of a course of obedience and close walking with himself, when he expected to die in his nest and to see good all of his days, ruins him in a moment, blasts his name, that he who was esteemed a choice saint shall not be able to deliver himself from the common esteem of a hypocrite, slays his children, takes away his rest, health, and everything that is desirable to him. This amazes the soul. It knows not what God is doing, nor why he pleads with it in so much bitterness. A man that either is or may fall into such a condition will find that he will never be able to walk with God in it, without humbling himself to the law of his providence. Fourthly, great, deep, and abiding distresses have the same effects with sudden alterations, of which more afterwards. And these are, in general, some of the things in God's providential disposal of the things of the men of this world, that are too hard and awful for flesh and blood, and which his paths are in the deep, which are contrary to all rules of procedure that he has given us to judge by, who are to judge of things but once, he being to call all things to a second account. Having given these two observations, I return to what I first proposed, namely, the duty of humbling ourselves to the law of the providence of God so far as it concerns us in particular. I do not intend merely that men in general should be content with the dealings of God in the world, but that we should humble our hearts to him in what falls to be our share in it. Though it come under any one or more of the heads of difficulty before mentioned. Our lots are various in this world. How they may be further different before we go out of it, we don't know. Some are in one condition, some in another. That we don't envy one another, nor any in the world. That we don't repine against God, nor charge him foolishly. This is what I aim at. A thing sufficiently necessary in these days in which good men are too little able to bear their own condition, if in anything it differs from that of others. The next thing, then, is to consider how and wherein we are to humble ourselves to the law of the providence of God. There are things on this account which our souls are to be humbled to. First, his sovereignty. May he not do what he will with his own. So argued out in the book of Job that I shall need to go no further for the confirmation of it. Job 33, verses 8 to 13. The words are the sum of what was, or what was apprehended to be, the complaint of Job, that in the midst of his innocency and course of obedience God dealt hardly with him, and brought him into great distress. What is the reply to this? Verse 12. Behold, in this you are not just. It is a most unequal thing for any man to make any such complaints. Whether Job did so or not may be disputed, but for anyone to do so is certainly most unjust. But on what ground is that asserted? See the words following. God is greater than man. Why do you strive with him? It is to no purpose to contend with him that is mightier than you. And it is likewise unjust to do it with him, who is infinitely and incomparably so, upon the account of his absolute dominion and sovereignty. For he says he gives no account of his manners. He disposes all things as he will and as he pleases. This is pursued to the utmost, chapter 34, verses 18 and 19. Men will not be forward openly to revile or repine against their governors. And what shall be said of God, who is infinitely exalted above them? So you have the conclusion of the whole matter in verses 31 to 33. This, I say, is a first thing, that we are to humble ourselves too. Let us lay our mouths in the dust and ourselves on the ground and say, It is the Lord. I will be silent, because he has done it. He is of one mind, and who can turn him? He does whatever he pleases. Am not I in his hand as clay in the hand of the potter? May not make what kind of vessel he pleases. When I was not, he brought me out of nothing by his word. What I am or have is merely of his pleasure. I'll let my heart and thoughts be full of deep subjection to his supreme dominion and uncontrollable sovereignty over me. Disquieted Aaron in his great distress, and David in his, 2 Samuel 15, verses 25 and 26, and Job in his. It is pleaded by the Lord in Jeremiah 10, Romans 9:11, and innumerable other places. If we intend to walk with God, we must humble ourselves to this, and in this we shall find rest. Second, his wisdom. He is wise also, as he speaks in derision of men's pretending to be so. Indeed, God is only wise. Now he has undertaken to make all things work together for good to them that love him, Romans 8, verse 28. That we shall not be in heaviness unless it is needful, 1 Peter 1, verse 6. In many dispensations of its providence we are at a loss. We cannot measure them by that rule. We don't see how the state or condition can be good for the church in general, or us in particular. We suppose it would be more for his glory and our advantage if things were otherwise disposed. Innumerable are the reasonings of the hearts of the sons of men on this account. We don't know the thoughts of our own souls in this, how vile they are. God will have to humble ourselves to his wisdom in all of his dispensations and to captivate our understandings to it. So Isaiah 40, verses 27 and 28. This is that which our hearts do rest in, when ready to repine. There is no end of his understanding. He sees all things, in all their causes, effects, and circumstances, in their utmost reach, tendency, and correspondency. We walk in a shade and know nothing of what is before us. The day will come and we shall see one thing set against another, and infinite wisdom shining out of them all, that all things were done in number, weight, and measure, that nothing could have been otherwise than it is disposed of without the abridgment of the glory of God and the good of his church. Yes, I dare say that there is no saint of God that is distressed by any dispensation of providence, but that if he will seriously and impartially consider his own state and condition, the frame of his heart, his temptations and ways, with so much of the aims and ends of the Lord, as will assuredly be discovered of faith and prayer. But he will have some rays and beams of infinite wisdom shining in it, tempered with love, goodness, and faithfulness. But whether for the present we have this light or not, or are left to darkness, this is the haven and rest of our tossed souls, the ark and bosom of our peace, to humble our souls to the infinite wisdom of God and all of his procedure, and on that account quietly to commit all things to his management. Third, his righteousness. Though God will have us acquiesce in his sovereignty, when we can see nothing else, yet he will have us know that all of his ways are equal and righteous. The holy God will do no iniquity. That he is righteous in all of his ways and holy in all of his works is pleaded as much as anything that he has discovered of himself. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Is God unjust who inflicts vengeance? God forbid. The righteousness of God, all which springs from and is reduced to the universal rectitude of his nature in respect to the works that he does, is manifold. It is that which is called justitia regiminis, his righteousness, in rule or government, in the dispensation of rewards and punishments. That I am now speaking of. Now because we are not able to discern it in many particulars of his proceeding, to help us in humbling ourselves to it, take these considerations first. That God judges not as man judges. Man judges according to the seeing of the eye and the hearing of the ear, but God searches the heart. Little do we know what is in the heart of men, what transactions there are or have been between God and them, which if they were drawn forth, as they shall be one day, the righteousness of God and his procedure would shine as the sun. Rest on this. We know much less of the manner on the account in which God judges than we do of the rule in which he judges. More thanks are to him otherwise than to us. Secondly, God is a great judge of all the world, not of this or that particular place, and so disposes of all as may tend to the good of the whole, and his glory in the universality of things. Our thoughts are bounded, much more our observation and knowledge, within a very narrow compass. That may seem deformed to us, which, when it lies under an eye that at once has a prospect of the whole, is full of beauty and order. He that was able to see at once but some one small part of a goodly statue may think it is a deformed piece, when he sees it all together, and is assured of its due proportion and comeliness. All things in all places, the ages past and to come, lie at once naked before God, and he disposes of them so as that, in their contexture, and answer one to another, they shall be full of order, which is properly righteousness. Thirdly, God judges here not by any final determinate sentence, but in a way of preparation to a judgment to come. This unties all knots and solves all difficulties whatever. This makes righteous and beautiful the deepest distresses of the godly and the highest advancements of wicked men. And there let our souls rest themselves in quietness. Acts 17. Fourthly is goodness, kindness, love, and tenderness. Our souls must submit themselves to believe all these to be in all God's dispensations. I shall but name that one place in which the apostle disputes for it, Hebrews 12:1-6, and add that in which Hosea closes his declaration of God's various dispensations and dealings with his people, Hosea 14:9. This now it is, to humble our souls to the law of God's providence in all his dispensations, to fall down before his sovereignty, wisdom, righteousness, goodness, love, and mercy. And without this frame of heart, there is no walking with God, unless we intend to come into his presence to quarrel with him, which will not be for our advantage.